This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Hey, what's up, and welcome to QnA, the show where I take your questions from YouTube and Twitter and answer them here in video format. A ton of things to get into, so let's just jump into it. Says, yo, Q, I guess I'm puzzled about the way these restructures work. They seem like a beneficial thing for the organization, so why don't they just do them all at once as soon as they can, as they possibly can? Is there a player consent component to this, or is this just an organizational decision? So I'll answer the second part first. Is there a player consent component to this, or is this just an organizational decision? The player has to agree to it, but as long as the player is reasonably assuming he's going to be with this team for a little bit, they usually have no issue. Like, you do this with contracts like Myles Garrett, you do this with contracts like Denzel Ward, you do this with contracts like that Deshaun Watson, where there's really no doubt that you're planning to keep these players year to year. So the restructure benefits them because it kind of guarantees them some roster bonus money that might not have been guaranteed otherwise. And it's just, they get their money up front, basically. So for the players, this makes sense because they get their money up front. For the team, it makes sense for those kind of guys because it allows them to be happy with how much they're being paid on their base salary, right? You can give them those competitive rates at market value while also lowering their cap hit for a year or two period as you try to kind of win now. The reason they don't do it all at one time is simply logistics. I think, like, you still got to get with somebody's agent and sign some paperwork. You're still going to have to work some logistics out. So they're not going to be announced all at the same time because it's not really convenient to do that. It's just whenever you can get things worked out. Like, it's no surprise that Denzel Ward's restructure got announced right around the same time that everybody's in Indianapolis for the combine, right? Like, that's more of a logistical thing. Why doesn't the team just do them all at once as soon as they possibly can? Yeah, but basically that's how the restructures work. The players usually agree to it because it gives them their money guaranteed up front in the signing bonus. The teams like to do this with big salary players because it moves their money around in the cap. So it's like, hey, you got your money already, but we're just going to manipulate when it hits our salary cap. So it's kind of a win-win situation for both teams, given that, for both parties, given that they both want to win now, right? It's a way to, they don't take a pay cut, but it's a way to lower the salary cap hit, so you can essentially take a pay cut for cap purposes, but you're not losing any money as a player. And this is what teams with cash do to free up cap space, right? When you hear an owner talking about they need players to take less money, that usually means that the owner is not willing to spend more cash, right? Not necessarily a salary cap issue. The Browns spend the most cash, but they also have a very sustainable cap situation because Jimmy's willing to spend that cash. So, you know, it's really dependent on that too. But I hope that cleared up some of your questions that you had, CTG, and kind of answered what your questions were with the restructures. So there it is. Basher says, purely hypothetical, but we gave up our second round pick for Elijah Moore. Do you agree with that deal, or should we have gone a different route? I personally think of Moore as a third wide receiver. I don't think any wide receiver really got a fair shake this year. You know, given that the quarterback room was in such disarray. For most of the year, there was no ability to really build any real chemistry. Like, Joe Flacco played 6 games. Deshaun Watson played 3 games, got hurt, then played 2 games, got hurt again. DTR started 1 game randomly, then started another game, and then got started another game, got hurt. And then PJ Walker started a couple of games and got pulled. Like, no quarterback started more than 8 games in a row this season or even came close to that. So I think it's kind of tough to judge Elijah Moore, especially to given that he's a receiver that you want to go downfield with. And this team lost all of their starting tackles, which I think really affected their ability to use Elijah Moore. And I think he showed up a little bit towards the end of the season despite all of that. And I would be encouraged by what you could see out of Elijah Moore if things just go right around him a little bit more. I think he will put out better numbers. Now, would that be worth a second round pick? Depends on what a second round pick is worth in your mind. To me, I expect somebody who's traded for a second round pick to be anywhere from 800 yards to an 1,000-yard receiver. Anything above that is bonus. I know people are going to point out that there's been receivers drafted in that round that have been better than that. Obviously, there's also been the inverse of that. Receivers drafted in the second round has been worse than that. The reason I think that that's about the bar that I would go with Elijah Moore is that's kind of, if they drafted Elijah Moore in the second round, I would be happy with that production. And that's kind of where I'm going with it. So I don't think it's fair to call this thing a failure yet. But just like a lot of things on this team, we really just need to see a year of consistent quarterback play to really gauge where a lot of stuff is. Big Cardi 216 says, "What's good, Q? This is a hypothetical question and scenario. So what if Nick Chubb comes back full strength?" As I believe he will. DW4 is clicking at form. We hope he will, with Ken Dorsey and Kevin, along with the additions the staff made and the renovations to the offense to be better, more efficient standards. I always like Kevin as a play caller with the better play sheet. I believe our offense could be unstoppable to an extent, especially if the defense plays to the level that it did last year. Jim fixes the aggressiveness over pursuing, doesn't lead the side of the field. Really open. A lot of players had a breakout year last year. I believe the same will happen with this upcoming season. Yeah, I agree with the optimism. I don't know if I agree with the specific pieces of analysis here. Look, Jim's defense is going to be aggressive. I don't think that that's an issue. Just when you're aggressive, you have to win at the line of scrimmage. And when you don't win at the line of scrimmage and you're being aggressive, it's going to bite you in the ass. So I think that they need to do everything they can to shore up that line of scrimmage to make sure they win as much as possible. And as far as all the Ken Dorsey, Deshaun Watson, Kevin Stefanski thing, outside of they're bringing in a new offensive coordinator to help with the offense and give them more answers. I think the big upgrade to the offense is going to be a healthy Deshaun Watson. Like, I think that would have been a huge help for this team. I think they were a significantly better team when you talk about the ability to maintain leads, the ability to capitalize and play complementary football with the defense. They did that at the highest level when Deshaun Watson was in there. I think that matters. Like, it matters when he's out there. It does make a huge difference. I think you do beat the Houston Texans in the playoffs if Deshaun Watson is healthy, given that you beat the 1 seed on the road with a healthy Deshaun Watson, and still a very injured Browns team in that game, right? So I think it does make a difference. Ken Dorsey will also kind of tighten the screws on that. The new staff will tighten the screws. But I think the Browns' biggest issue at the quarterback position last year wasn't that Deshaun Watson wasn't good at quarterback, or at least effective enough to really make a difference for this team. I thought he was. He wasn't at where he was before he got suspended and everything. Like, he wasn't at like top 5 levels or anything like that. But he was at good. He was at top half of the league. Like, you can really do a lot with the quarterback who can manage the game and then kind of make some plays on top of that. I think with that, they would have went much further. And now with Ken Dorsey, you're hoping that you can get to him reaching his potential as a quarterback. And also that includes him staying healthy. So, that's my thoughts on that. Gaggle Master. I don't know if I'm being memed here, but I'm gonna just say GM says, not a Browns topic, but about the UFL merger. How do you think this will influence the NFL? And do you think it will open a new stream slash former players to come to the NFL? I think for the UFL, they just need to try to beat the MLS, right? The MLS isn't the number one soccer league in the world. It's not even close. Nobody thinks of it like that. But they can eventually, they can occasionally get Messi to play for one of their teams, at a relatively young enough age where he's still entertaining to watch. I think that's the goal for the UFL, right? Build up some strong fan bases in the spring, have 20, 30,000 people come out to watch these teams at every location, and then get to a point to where, you can expand, and maybe, 1 year Devontae Adams wants to play a bonus year of football when he's pretty much done, or like Julio Jones at this point in his career, instead of being a journeyman, barely getting reps, maybe he wants to play a couple more years of football. He signs with the UFL, and then you get some old school stars like that, but you also get the younger guys in there. I think basically the UFL, their motto to success is the MLS, because the MLS kind of started as a joke, right? It wasn't taken seriously, but now it's at the point to where, it's a real league. Like, it's not one of the best leagues in the world. It's not ever going to be that, but it is a entertaining league. It's a fun league to watch, and they have engaged fan bases. And I think that draws a lot of people in. And I think soccer is more popular now because of the persistence that the MLS has had with that, and how they've built these markets over the years and been able to build solid fan bases that put up solid attendance numbers. And I think it's fun for everybody. Ian says, hey, Q, if the Browns were to go crazy this year in free agency, getting guys like Chris Johnson, Mike Evans, with that, what level of stress and cap devastation would the Browns be 3 to 5 years from now? The issue isn't going to be 3 to 5 years. Think about when the Los Angeles Rams went all in, the year they won that Super Bowl. Was that 2021, the year the Bengals went. They're pretty much back to being in a competitive spot with the salary cap 3 to 5 years later. They just had a couple of years where, they were paying for some of that stuff a little bit, or at least 1 year where they were paying for it. And then Matt Stafford got hurt on top of that. It's going to be 1 year where they're going to be tight on the cap, but depending on when that year falls, you might not care as much. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be like 3 to 5 years of cap devastation, or in 3 to 5 years you would be devastated. It would be, hey, if you go all in this year and maybe leave a little room for you to go half in next year, then probably by the time you get to 2026, you would probably have to have a year where it's like, we just gonna throw it out there and see what happens. It's not gonna be a year where you're really pushing for a championship. Doesn't mean you're rebuilding, but you're gonna have to hold firm while you pay off some cap penalties. And then the next year, you'll be kind of relatively back to normal. Really, the penalty that any team pays for being in cap devastation is 1 year of just sitting it out. It's not going to be a multi-year thing, more than likely, as long as they keep doing what they're doing. Mims says, do you think Browns fans and fans in general take players for granted? Like, Newsome is certainly not elite and not a player I pay big money to, but other teams would most certainly love to have Newsome as a cornerback 3. Of course, there are always players that get taken for granted because, especially on a very talented team like the Browns, where it's easy to take Greg Newsome for granted because he's not in a position to be his best self. And he's in a position where you're constantly comparing him to players who are better than him, right? The issue with Greg Newsome isn't that he's not a good player. The issue is that we compare him to guys that are better players than him. And that's not necessarily super fair to Greg, because it's not like Greg's a bad player. It's just Martin ended up being a really, really good player, and Denzel Ward's one of the best corners in the NFL. Now, you can say you hope that Greg Newsome could be as good as Martin Emerson is, but Martin's just a better player. Like, Greg's very good. It just is what it is on that front. Like, I don't think there's really much he could do about that. So yeah, there's times where you take a player for granted. I mean, Jed Wills is another poster child where people constantly compare him to Joe Thomas because they see him as the successor. Almost every kicker that we've had in between Phil Dawson and Dustin Hopkins, I mean, they've been getting the wrong end of the stick here. It's tough. It's tough but players are always going to be living in some shadow. Like, I'm pretty sure the next edge guy that the Browns invest in, it's not Myles Garrett, right? After Myles Garrett leaves, hopefully in 25 years, they're probably going to have a rough time, right? It just is what it is. The next question comes from Ascendant, who says, "Hey Q, you've talked about how Pittsburgh runs pick and roll concepts on the defensive line. Can you explain that and maybe show a bit of tape on what that means? Are there things, their style that Browns could do to adopt things and protect against it when they play them?" Yeah, Pittsburgh, especially when they play Cleveland, you go back and watch my film breakdowns about this. But Pittsburgh, when they play Cleveland especially, they like to take advantage of some of the communication issues that we were having on the offensive line. And they will basically, it's stunt twist, but sometimes they'll stunt in a way that resembles a pick and roll. And what I mean by that is Cam Hayward will basically run his man into whoever Alex Highsmith's man is, so you can have a pin down and run Alex Highsmith underneath that screen. It's basically just setting the screen, right? Where Hayward gets out there, runs into somebody, sets a screen, while Highsmith kind of leads him into his chest and then runs underneath him. It's basically a pick and roll that they like to do there. They get creative, and I think some of that is just Cam Hayward being a veteran and trying things out. But yeah, they do a lot of it. And, the Browns want to protect against it better. They just got to get better at communication, which was a bad thing for them. They weren't really good at it last year. Brandon says, "If you were Andrew Berry on draft day, who are you selecting with our first pick?" Best offensive tackle available to me, that's Roger Rosengarten.